We've got a contribution from the floor.
Not really in relation to this. It was two new questions, related but separate. The first was around something that's been touched on throughout the day, around the whole financial context that we operate within, and how the panel feel that we most effectively keep the whole equality agenda at the forefront in the light of all the financial restrictions that we currently face and are likely to face to an even greater extent after the end of the current financial period.
Yes.
So how do we keep equality at the forefront and gender specifically at the forefront?
Yeah.
And as a follow-on from that, how does the NHS embrace the enormous resource that exists within the voluntary sector and supports that to make a contribution to the way that equality and diversity issues are incorporated within the services that the NHS provide, and also those services that are directly provided through the voluntary sector itself?
Thank you. Two very important questions. So to recap, one being, especially given the response, I think, to some of our voting questions in the middle of the day, yeah, about the impact that that the legislation might have, and that the focus has had, which was equivocal, to put it mildly, yeah? How do we keep equality and gender equality right up there when things are going to get extremely tight and people are going to be fighting over bits of the service like you wouldn't believe? Let's start with that one first. Who wants to take that one on? Martin.
As I said, we've not seen too many examples of this starting to bite yet in health, but what we have...
It's next year that's going to actually start.
What we have seen elsewhere is that, especially where equality has been treated as an extra or an add-on, it becomes easy to remove, and it can also be seen as something of a soft target. We've enough evidence to believe that. So I would urge you to be looking at building equality into what you do as a matter of course, and using the point where you come to the difficult decision that needs to be made to say, well, here's the point where we have to build in our thinking that we do around the decisions that we take. Because a crisis can be an opportunity as well.
Okay.
Just say I absolutely agree with that, and it's starting to happen more than it did. I mean, even in the 2 or 3 years that I've been particularly involved in this agenda, for the first time recently at the Strategic Directors of Planning meeting, which is all the NHS planning directors in Scotland coming together, they actually, amongst that body, presented a paper which was exactly about that. It was about how to consider cost savings, but include equality considerations within that. There's a long way to go from that being as part of a template, as we all know, that's produced at a business meeting, to getting the real essence of the thinking. But it's there, and it wasn't there a few years ago. So I think we're actually starting to see it happen, and I think that we, all of us, need to promote that, encourage that, learn from the practice around that.
Yes,
Alan. I was part of the Borman review of the NHS health and well-being of the workforce, and what they found was that a healthy, well workforce was actually not just healthy and well, it was also more productive. The infection rates went down, the patient stays went down. There was all sorts of positive effects, and so therefore by investing in health, the Rude Health report from the London School of Economics that looked at the Royal Mail, which is the third biggest employer of men in the country, they invested £48 million into the health of its workforce, and they got £280 million return on that. The economics of investing in health suddenly becomes absolutely apparent. I've already stated that 25% of the Scottish male workforce dies. That 25% of the deaths of all Scottish men die during the working years, 15 to 64. I mean,
but
that's a huge
case clearly
but
enough, isn't it?
So therefore, the financial case of having structured, focused healthcare that makes a difference to the individual, and the individual is male, female, gay, transgendered, of ethnic minority background, whoever. If the person is feeling disenfranchised or not focused upon, then you lose them. You either lose them in the big way through the suicide, through the heart attack, or through the stress, the presenteeism, the absenteeism, or you lose them through just not being engaged.
With all the knock-on effects of that, I mean, if you were to look at the economics of that and the impact on families, for instance, you're into gobsmacking territory. But do you think that case is made strongly enough, Yvonne?
I think that's the key point, is that who is making, somebody asked in one of the discussions about the budget, who makes the decisions and to what extent is this information taken into account?
Yeah.
And the question is, how do we ensure that Alan's contribution and the kind of the information, the evidence is what we are reflecting in the decisions we make about our spending and our policies and where we go forward, which is why I sound like a broken record. But actually, if we did what we were meant to do or could do, and this is, I say we collectively, because I'm part of the, needed to do this too, getting the thinking and using the lever of the public duties to help that process, then we might be able to make sure that some of this agenda is not lost. In some respects, the fact that there is a legal lever through the public duties enables this agenda to be on the discussion, or as part of the discussion, where in fact perhaps others, may not be able to do, because we have a public duty that enables this to be part of the equation. And I think we need to use the evidence that is around. We need to be better at narrating that, and not just maybe just talking amongst ourselves, but talking to those who sometimes don't listen or aren't aware of the issues, to make sure that that then becomes part of the thinking.
Yeah. And the second part of your question was, remind me? Briefly.
The second part was how the NHS in Scotland embraces the resource within the voluntary sector and supports that.
Absolutely.
Because
the importance of working with the voluntary sector. I was in the room, the mental health room, and hearing people from the voluntary sector and the very important contribution they make. Better integration. We hear this right across the NHS. Looking to the future, and there's threats to the voluntary sector with public sector funding, local authority funding, single outcome agreements, etc. How hard are we going to have to try to protect that, or can we just forget about that and pick it up when we're all rich again?
I don't think you can, and I think that, on a broader thing, I can't speak on behalf of the NHS, maybe Kath can fit in, but certainly the government as a whole has a very clear view that the third sector, the voluntary sector, has a major role to play in the way that we move forward, and that support is there and does exist. That doesn't mean that this is going to be a very tough time.
Yeah.
And I think it's going back to trying to make sure that the right decisions are made and are informed. That doesn't mean that there isn't going to be pain. I think whether it's in the statutory or the voluntary sector, you can't come through this process without some difficulties. But I think as long as we're making the decisions correctly and seeing that there is a contribution that can be made from all the sectors to the delivery of the health services, certainly in the voluntary and the statutory sector, how that, or certainly in the public sector rather, in terms of the health service, I'm less clear about the relationship that exists, and maybe others are in a better position to
we've got organisations out there like it's Breathing Space that was talking about providing an out-of-hours contact point that was absolutely vital, particularly for men with mental health problems. A huge challenge for Scotland. How are we going to protect that? Because if they lose the funding that they need to operate, then we go back to 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, when it's not out of hours, which is 2/3 of the time. Kath, how are we going to do that? How are we going to guard that? Big question.
It's a big question. I'm struggling to answer it in from the point of view of funding as such, and I'm just speaking from a particular organisational perspective. We don't do a lot of direct funding of third sector organisations, but we certainly do, and we have a role to learn how to do this much better and how to support others do it much better. We certainly have a big role in working with third sector organisations. One of the practical things that we've done, and a lot of them mentioned before this morning, around our equality impact assessment work, and that is only because of some of the relationships that we've been developing, particularly over the last couple of years with the third sector voluntary organisations, to make sure that when we have that kind of conversation and develop that kind of thinking, we're doing it with the right people in the room who understand the issues, and that's certainly one practical way that we can take that forward, and are doing actively.